Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome back to the second week of the OSCE Human Dimension Implementation Meeting 2017. My name is William Romans. I am a Senior Legal Advisor to the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities, and it's my privilege to be your moderator for this morning's session. We recommence with working session 10 on tolerance and non-discrimination, including the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, Roma and Sinti issues, including the implementation of the OSCE Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti, as well as preventing aggressive nationalism, racism and chauvinism. I would like to thank the delegations and the chairmanship for the inclusion of today's important topics, and note that due to the breadth of this combined session, this morning has been prepared for jointly by HCNM and ODIHR. First of all, I'd like to recognize the presence of the ODIHR Director, Madame Gisla-Dottir. And representing the High Commissioner here is Mr. Henrik Veladsen, our Director. Additionally, I'd like to recognize Ms. Tatjana Peric, the Acting Chief of the OSCE Contact Point on Roma and Sinti issues. We look forward to a constructive discussion and stand ready to assist you the best we can. I'll now briefly highlight some of the issues which our session will focus on. Integration of diverse societies is one of our focus points. It is key to facilitating security and stability both within and among participating states. As High Commissioner Zanier indicated last week, it is recommended that states adopt measures and implement policies aimed at promoting the integration and cohesion of diverse societies. This strengthens the stability of the state and reduces the risk of conflict. We may also wish to consider specifically how integration policies affect Roma and Sinti people. We should critically examine the impact of the specific tasks attributed to both participating states and OSCE institutions by the 2003 OSCE Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti. A point of pressing relevance to all these issues, which I understand both our introducers might touch upon, is that plans and documents should be backed by financial allocations and adequate resources. The increasing social welfare gap between Roma and Sinti and majority populations attests to the fact that we need to refocus our commitment. Participants are also invited to address how participating states are ensuring implementation of OSCE commitments on preventing aggressive nationalism, racism and chauvinism, and how failure to do so may present a conflict risk. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, I've been asked to make a few logistical reminders. We operate on the basis of a speakers list. The speakers list is already full and is now closed. Due to the full speakers list and the fact that we have two introducers today, speaking time will be limited to 2 minutes per intervention, and I kindly request that you adjust your comments accordingly. Speakers may only take the floor in the capacity in which they are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list may be represented. We do expect that interventions are presented in a meaningful, orderly, and respectful manner. I've also been asked to remind you about the rules on filming and that there is a live stream feed available. If you have written statements which you intend to read from, please do submit them to the interpreters in advance, which will aid interpretation. And where there are written statements, they should be provided to the documentation desk to ensure the flow of documentation. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers. I'd like to introduce first, to my left, Ms. Ilse Brands-Keres. Ilse Brands-Keres is a senior research fellow at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights at Lund University and a member of the UN Human Rights Committee. She is also a former director of the High Commissioner on National Minorities Office, after which she was a visiting scholar at the Harriman Institute, Columbia University. She was previously a member and vice chair of the Advisory Committee of the Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. In the EU context, she was the independent member from Latvia of the Management Board of the EU Monitoring Centre on Racism and Xenophobia, where she was elected vice chairperson. She was also a member of the Management Board of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency since its inception, and was its chairperson from December 2009 until July 2012. I'd like to hand over first to Ilse. I'll introduce our second speaker following this. Ilse, please.
Thank you, William. Dear Director of ODIHR, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, colleagues, it's both a privilege and a real pleasure for me to be back here at the HDIM. And I would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner and our hosts, ODIHR, for this opportunity to share some reflections as we start this very topical working session. This year's focus on integration of diverse societies has been, as High Commissioner Zanje noted in the opening session, a topic close to all High Commissioners to date since Max van der Stoel, and there are good reasons for that, not only for the structural and sometimes direct prevention of conflict, but also for the implementation of the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. Promising experience has been accumulated in many participating states, and HCNM involvement has often facilitated work on the integration process, and it is important to seize the occasion, as we do here, to share such experience. It is equally important to make an honest assessment of approaches that have not been successfully implemented, and the situations where socioeconomic inequalities, political participation gaps, and differential levels of inclusion or exclusion, as well as related sense of belonging, continue. As we focus on integration of diverse societies with an understanding that we are concerned with a great variety of ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and religiously different groups, we even see alarming signs that divisiveness is growing, and both rhetoric and policy in a number of states is polarizing opinions and feeding into intolerance, racism, and radical nationalism, working in the exact opposite direction of inclusive and thus integrated societies. The urgency for a renewed effort to develop and implement effective and sustained policies and that facilitate integration of society has therefore, if anything, increased. At times in the past, the conceptualization of integration in its concern over cohesion of society was seen as putting the onus on integration on the members of minority groups to integrate into the wider society. And in that context, it was not surprising that there was a suspicion among some that integration would not be conducive to the full respect of rights of persons belonging to national minorities. Indeed, the origins of the conflict prevention and minority rights in the 1990s did receive an impetus from clear and immediate security concerns of the time. In today's world, we see a return to the tendency to securitize minorities, albeit in a different context and concerning different groups, not necessarily only national minorities. The HCNM Ljubljana Guidelines on Integration of Diverse Societies, launched in 2012, make it clear, however, that integration not only can, but must go hand in hand with a full respect for the rights of minorities, in particular rights of persons belonging to national minorities. This is a key point, and it is one that has been stressed by those integration strategies and action plans that have been recently developed by several participating states, making use also of the toolkit provided by the Ljubljana Guidelines. While sharing the experiences of designing and implementing integration frameworks and policies is useful, it is more so if we learn our lessons from what works and what doesn't work, so we can move forward. It is not a surprise that implementation of integration strategies and measuring their impact remains a challenge shared by many states, even if contexts differ. all too often the serious effort it takes to develop relevant strategies, even when it is done in a participatory and inclusive process, stops once the documents have been adopted by the government. Looking forward, one of the key challenges is how to move from mere words on paper to effective implementation. It is clear that this cannot happen unless adequate human and financial resources are assigned to the policies identified, and that these should not be a mere listing of policies that the various line ministries have already planned within their policy areas. This also requires that the strategy and policies are based on evidence, disaggregated data properly collected and analyzed. These are not new concerns, but they remain common obstacles in practice when integration, including respect for minority rights, is continuously assigned low levels of priority among policies. Since time is short, I will focus on 3 points where recent experience provides a source for further development in facilitating the integration process and inclusion of all. 1, there are an increasing number of examples of integration frameworks and policies at the local level, including in cities, which not only are tuned in to the specific community relations and needs of residents, but also are better placed to develop participatory, evidence-based, and targeted policies for which they are also more easily held accountable by residents. Networks of cities and local authorities sharing experience on intercultural policies, integration of migrants, or human rights-based inclusion have been established, and they provide a promising forum for further development of solid and sustainable integration policies. This does not take away the need to have national level strategies and political commitment at the highest level, but a joined up, coordinated set of policies within an overall framework are a hopeful development. 2, participation, in addition to equality and identity rights, has been a cornerstone for rights of persons belonging to national minorities since such rights were codified. The stress on effective participation in public affairs, for instance, as the High Commissioner's Lund recommendations, was a reminder that mere formal opportunities for equal participation are insufficient to fulfill these rights. Today, questions such as numbers of voters, adequate representation in elective and executive bodies, formal mechanisms for participation, such as consultative bodies, remain on the agenda. But for participation to be truly effective for all members of society, but focusing on minorities and especially the most excluded, marginalized, and vulnerable ones, there is a need to pay attention to the quality of participation, the access to and consumption of reliable information, and the actual level of engagement by proactive authorities, civil society, minority organizations, and individuals. This recognition of a mutual right and duty to engage can be the source of new initiatives that promote the process of integration. 3rd, promising initiatives have been developed in different participating states, often at the local level, that have sought to push for innovation and creativity in addressing challenges of integration and inclusion. These involve identifying new actors or creating new networks of actors who have previously not been working together, such as police, human rights commissions, minority communities, and youth leaders, or in other cases, private business leaders and minority community leaders, including women leaders, facilitated by local authorities, but aiming to create sustainable cooperative networks and to encourage bottom-up initiatives. The harnessing of new technologies, including ICT, for a contemporary approach to inclusion is also part of this trend of seeking new and creative approaches to support inclusion through the elimination of discrimination, prejudice, and low participation. In conclusion, a brief recap of suggested elements to bring the Ljubljana guidelines forward in theory and in practice. Vigilance against renewed risk of securitization of minority issues, including in the approach to minority rights. A focus on implementation, including adequate resources and impact assessment. A focus on integration as human rights-based inclusion, including minority rights. Holistic approach, comprehensive policies and joined-up governance, national strategies and political commitment are needed, but local level and cities are essential actors in the design and implementation of integration policies. Policy areas for targeted action are contextually identified, but focus on full equality and effective participation in public affairs and decision-making are always required. And inclusion cannot take place without the impactful participation of minorities. Effective participation requires going beyond formal opportunities or quantitative measurements of participation to include quality of participation and proactive engagement by all actors. So I look forward to hearing more on the specifics of Roma inclusion and also to all your views and experiences in fulfilling the commitments on integration and minority rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ilse. And it's also a privilege to have with us Dr. Julius Rostes. Dr. Rostes is a scholar and political scientist of Roma origin who has cooperated extensively with the OSCE and with a record of research and publications on the topic of strategic frameworks for Roma integration, including analysis commissioned by the European Commission. He earned a BA and a PhD at Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj, Romania. In 2001, he received an MA in Human Rights from the Department of Legal Studies at the Central European University, with his dissertation titled Post-Communism and Ethnic Minorities, Policies Towards Roma in the Czech Republic, Hungary and Romania. Mr. Rostes, Dr. Rostes, worked as a director of the Roma programs of the Open Society Institute, international advocacy coordinator with the European Roma Rights Centre, an expert for the government of Romania. He advocated for Roma school desegregation in Central and Eastern Europe and provided technical assistance and capacity building to NGOs and governments in the region. Dr. Rostes, it's our privilege to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2003 OSCE Action Plan on Roma and Sinti set important standards as the first comprehensive policy document for Roma and Sinti integration adopted at international level, and inspired subsequent processes such as the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies up to 2020, adopted by the European Council in 2011. Roma and Sinti are on average in a worse vulnerable position than the majority population, and they continue to face racism and discrimination in all areas of public life. The European Commission's recent communication regarding the midterm review of the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies, issued on 30th of August 2017, states, "It is clear that 5 years is too short a period to undo centuries of discrimination and deprivation." I cannot but agree with such a statement. Over the last 25 years, Roma were at the center of attention of international organizations and national governments as never before in their history. The concern with the situation of Roma is reflected in the increased number of policy documents targeting Roma. The 2003 OSCE Action Plan on Roma and Sinti, the Decade of Roma Inclusion 2005-2015, the Council of Europe's Strasbourg Declaration of 2010, and the EU Framework for National Roma Integration Strategies up to 2020, but also national strategies and programs to improve the situation of Roma and Sinti. It is high time for these institutions and for the participating states to reflect on their experience and identify lessons learned during the policy processes targeting Roma. As a scholar conducting research on and teaching about policy making towards Roma and Sinti, I identified the following lessons for successful policy making towards Roma that we all should learn from the field. Participation mechanisms to ensure meaningful participation of Roma and Sinti, with special attention to women and youth, is a must for any effective policy. Roma and Sinti participation is key to bring change into Roma communities and society at large. Roma's vulnerability comes from the fact that through the political processes, the voice of Roma remains unheard. As we are a diverse population, the voice of all Roma groups should be heard. The second lesson, the active role of local authorities in designing and implementing policies is crucial for any improvement of the situation of Roma and Sinti. Local authorities have significant leverage over policy implementation, and often results depend on their commitment to address certain issues. Combating anti-Gypsyism as a special form of racism towards Roma should be at the core of any policy intervention. Institutional discrimination, segregation in education and housing, to name just some manifestations of anti-Gypsyism, represent structural factors that reproduce inequalities between Roma and majority population in our societies. Mainstreaming gender and adopting an intersectional approach is needed to effectively address complex issues faced by Roma and Sinti. Roma women and youth could bring a significant contribution to social change in our societies. Intersectional approaches provide a different understanding of the complex nature of issues faced by Roma. Racism, poverty, gender, disability, and age could give rise to specific forms of exclusions when they are combined, that are different from just considering exclusion based on a single ground. Last but not least, financial allocations and adequate resources should back plans and documents. Such planning requires data and monitoring and evaluation frameworks to provide feedback in real time to adjust policy measures. The global economic and the recent migration crisis revived and fueled trends of increased anti-Roma rhetoric by populist politicians and extremists, or violent manifestations against Roma and Sinti. I'd like to underline that the increasing gap between Roma and Sinti and mainstream societies is reflected in the escalation of hate crimes and violence against Roma and Sinti. I use this opportunity to raise some questions to the delegations of participating states. Has the impact of integration policies for national minorities and Roma and Sinti been monitored and measured, and what are the lessons learned? Is there evidence regarding which measures have had a definite positive impact on, or examples of promising practices? What are the main challenges to implementation of integration policies? Which mechanisms are in place to ensure that minorities, including Roma and Sinti, are consulted regularly on policy development and implementation? Do these processes include consultations with women from national minorities, including Roma and Sinti women? And do they address issues that affect minority women and youth? Do new current challenges to peace and security in the OSCE region compel participating states to design, implement, or revisit existing integration strategies, and which new elements should be introduced to integration policies to effectively address new current challenges to peace and security in the OSCE region? How are participating states ensuring implementation of OSCE commitments on preventing aggressive nationalism, racism, and chauvinism? Of course, I have also a set of recommendations. OSCE participating states should create mechanisms for an effective participation of Roma and Sinti, and in particular Roma and Sinti women and youth, in policy processes concerning them. This mechanism should ensure that the voice of all Roma groups is heard at local, regional, and national level. OSCE participating states should place the fight against anti-Gypsies at the core of their policies towards Roma to promote equality and social inclusion. Without removing structural factors reproducing inequality, no policy towards Roma will succeed. Regarding monitoring the impact of integration policies of Roma and Sinti, OSCE participating states need to increase efforts in terms of allocating adequate resources, creating effective monitoring frameworks, set quantifiable indicators and targets, and collect necessary data. OSCE participating states should ensure the mainstreaming of specific measures related to Roma and Sinti women and youth are mainstream into both integration policies related to Roma and Sinti, as well as in mainstream policies related to women and youth. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very interesting introduction, which I'm sure will stimulate a lot of thought. And thank you also to Ilse. I'd now like to open the floor to participants. Due to the number of speakers on the full reserve list, time is limited to 2 minutes, and I do apologize in advance that I have to be fairly strict with my buzzer. When you hear it, please remember that we're following you and we hope that you end soon. Please also keep your comments to the point. If you can, start with any recommendations which you would like to meet, and then follow up with the explanation. Criticism is, of course, invited, and it should be constructive. First on my speakers list, I have the Netherlands on behalf of the EU, followed by the Muslim Religious Board of the Republic of Tatarstan. The Netherlands, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I am honored to speak on behalf of the European Union and Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland, Georgia, and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The European Union welcomed the High Commissioner on National Minorities, Mr. Lamberto Zanier, to this OSCE Human Dimension implementation meeting in his new capacity last week. We would like to congratulate Mr. Zanier on his appointment and wish him every success in his endeavors. We commend Mr. Henrik Villatsen, Director and former officer in charge, and the HCNM team for continuing the excellent work of the office, ensuring consistency in all aspects of the mandate in a historically unprecedented interlude without a High Commissioner. The European Union strongly believes that protection of human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to national minorities, is crucial for maintaining regional peace and stability. Therefore, we would like to present the following recommendations. Participating states meet the commitment made by all OSCE participating states without exception to fully cooperate with the High Commissioner in order to enable the High Commissioner to fulfill his mandate. This includes granting the High Commissioner full, free, and unrestricted access. Participating states extend an invitation to the High Commissioner and make full use of the expertise of this institution. Quiet diplomacy, which the High Commissioner also implements, is complementary to public diplomacy and can help bring results of lasting importance. Persons belonging to national minorities should be able to exercise fully and effectively their human rights and fundamental freedoms without discrimination and in full equality before the law. Regarding the situation of Roma and Sinti persons in the OSCE area, the European Union would like to present a set of recommendations and messages. Continuous, resolute efforts are needed at all levels for the inclusion of Roma and Sinti persons. In particular, the Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti within the OSCE area should be subject to a regular review of its implementation. Participating states are called to fully support the activity of ODIHR with a view to facilitating the implementation review process. Encourage OSCE participating states to provide information on specific steps and recent developments in the situation of Roma and Sinti persons and/or measures inspired by this action plan. continue to ensure the complementarity of the OSCE Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti and the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies, which established a solid policy, legal and financial framework at both EU and national levels. Take effective measures to ensure respect of fundamental rights for Roma and Sinti persons, organize campaigns to raise awareness of these rights, enhance participation in public life of Roma and Sinti youth, and pay particular attention to Roma and Sinti women and girls who often face multiple forms of discrimination. Welcome the focus of the contact point for Roma and Sinti of ODIHR on enhancing the public and political participation of Roma and Sinti women, contributing thus to the implementation of the Kyiv Ministerial Council Declaration, as well as the consultation meetings for Roma and Sinti women activists. Put greater emphasis on actions in the areas of education and employment, promote the training of mediators and training of trainers, and ensure access to education. Combating all forms of discrimination, including multiple discrimination faced by Roma children and women, and fighting violence, including domestic violence against women and girls, trafficking in human beings, underage and forced marriages are further issues that we are seeking to address, in particular through the enforcement of legislations. A full set of recommendations will be circulated in our written statement. Thank you.
Thank you. And I understand the specifically combined nature of that statement. However, I would like to remind participants to stick to their allotted speaking time in order to ensure a fair representation of everyone around the table. Next on the list, I have the Muslim Religious Board of the Republic of Tatarstan, followed by the International Society of Meskhetian Turks Vatan. Muslim Religious Board, the floor is yours.
Уважаемые участники,
Ladies and gentlemen, in my short statements, I would like to share with you the experience of what we do to combat extremism among young people. We are a religious and national minority in the Russian Federation, and we combat all forms of extremism. The way we do this takes many different shapes and forms. We need to cooperate closely with the representatives of other religious institutions, and that is important for a systemic and holistic approach to our anti-extremist activities. For young people, of course, the way they most frequently obtain information about Islam is through the internet, but unfortunately the internet is often used by extremists who try to recruit new disciples. So it's important that we act to limit access to certain types of material, that we control sites that publish pages that do incite to extremism, and we have adopted this second approach. We have also internet sites that provide counter information. We also have a radio station that is broadcast on the internet, and we often attract tens of thousands of listeners per day. We also have a site that is visited by 500,000 subscribers. And we provide information about our traditions through a site called Madrasa, and we cover a whole series of issues relating to religious extremism. We've also opened a television station on the internet, and we target people who are 18 and older, and they can study in madrasas through the internet, and this allows us to provide them with a non-extremist or an anti-extremist approach. Of course, it's very important that the quality of our content be as high as possible, and we take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next on my list, I have the International Society of Meskhetian Turks Vatan, followed by the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. international society. The floor is yours.
Спасибо, уважаемый.
Thank you very much, Moderator. I'd like to draw attention to the question of the outstanding problem of Meskhetian Turks, which is one of the ethnic people of the region of the south of Georgia, which was subject during the time of the Soviet Union to deportation. And the people is now scattered throughout 9 countries of the world. We fail to understand the recent conclusions of the monitoring group sent to monitor the completion of Georgia's commitments vis-à-vis the European Union, where they recognized the success of repatriation measures. We don't understand these conclusions because the policy can only really be deemed a failure. And eloquently, if you look at the figures, they speak for themselves. Throughout the years of its existence, the return program has only seen 19 people return, and only 12 of them have received Georgian citizenship. If that's something you can call positive, well, then I would have no further comments to add. Furthermore, the conclusions felt that the number of Meskhetian Turks that have returned outside the context of the program, which once again is testimony to its failure. The monitoring group did not have any contact with the other sides, the civil society organizations of Meskhetian Turks. They don't have the resources to make their voice heard and participate in the monitoring group's work. So it's a shame to see the monitoring group didn't see Meskhetian Turks wishing to return. At the moment, this meeting is one of the few international fora where we can make our voice heard and get our message across. So on the basis of the failed repatriation program, we would call on all relative bodies to recognize the failure of Georgia to effectively apply the repatriation of Meskhetian Turks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for your timely intervention. Next on the list, I have the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, followed by the Russian Federation. The Azerbaijan Institute, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Ahmad Shaidov. I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Today I want to speak about aggressive nationalism, racism and chauvinism. I believe that every diplomat sitting here is a patriot of his country. Patriotism is support for one's own country. However, you need not to be a nationalist to be a patriot. Nationalists think that national identity is very important in life. Most nationalists believe that their own cultural practice are a superior way of doing things. The distinction between terms are important. Nationalism is perfectly normal and found in most countries today. Also, there are nationalists who do not respect the sovereignty of other countries. Their beliefs are not implicit in the term nationalism. And there is a fascism. Sometimes people, political parties, and even separate countries confuse their perceptions of patriotism. Naturally, every soldier may kill an enemy soldier during a war. This is the order of war. But killing innocent people, especially small babies, leads to fascism. There is no other name for this. I ask all you to pay attention to these photos. This photo was not taken in Iraq or in Syria. This kid was killed not by ISIS activists. This child was murdered in Fizuli district of Azerbaijan in July of this year. This baby, who was killed as a result of the shootings of Armenian armed forces while playing in the yards of their homes, was 2 years old. Her name was Zahra. The killing of 2-year-old Zahra and her grandmother as a result of Armenian army shelling of the Alkhanlı village of Fizuli district of Azerbaijan is an intolerable international crime. Despite a ceasefire reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan back in 1994, following the Nagorno-Karabakh war, Azerbaijani civilians, including children, still became the victims of Armenian aggression. We strongly condemn the assassination of civilian population by Armenian armed forces and describe it as a gross violation of international law, in particular the Geneva Convention. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and may I remind all participants to try to focus their comments on the topics which we have outlined for today's discussion. Next on my list, I have the Russian Federation, followed by the United States of America. Russian Federation, the floor is yours.
Distinguished moderator, distinguished experts, the Russian delegation welcomes the appointment of Mr. Zanier to the position of OSCE High Commissioner for National Minorities. We consider that his knowledge and previous experience of work will give a fresh and strong impulse to work in this area without political blindness or deafness, that he will avoid double standards and selectivity in assessing the situation of national minorities in individual countries. It is quite appropriate that we have on the agenda this issue of improving the situation of the Roma. In Europe, this 11 million community continues to be socially isolated, despite considerable financial resources and targeted programs and projects initiated by the European Union. In some parts of the world, and particularly in North America, as noted by Rita Izak, former UN Special Rapporteur for Minority Issues in her global report on the situation of Roma in the world, no attention whatsoever is paid to this particular issue. We would like to draw attention to all sorts of problems in this field. The phenomenon of large-scale statelessness in a number of countries of the European Union, including Latvia and Estonia and others. We note that certain practices of individual states which have been criticized by human rights defense mechanisms of international organizations are nevertheless being actively implemented as we speak. For instance, in November of 2016, Ukraine increased quotas of Ukrainian language songs to be played on radio. This practice of combating songs and dances on the pretext of defending national security is something we've seen in the past. The Verkhovna Rada is now dealing with a draft law that would introduce strict sanctions for not using the official language, even including criminal liability. There will be positions created of language inspectors, which reminds us of the practice of language inspection in the Baltic states. And we believe that not paying attention appropriately to these issues will result to more conflict potential in our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Next on my list, I have the United States of America, followed by Switzerland. The United States, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, and a warm welcome to Ambassador Zanier. Violations of rights of minorities persist in our region. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the collective privileges of select groups supersede the individual rights of citizens. Non-Serbs suffer discrimination in Republika Srpska. Serbs face discrimination in Croatia and in Kosovo. Kosovo should be represented here. Russia's occupation authorities Under Russia's occupation authority, Crimean Tatars face serious abuses, including torture and killings. Last week, Renat Parlamov was taken away by masked men in uniform, severely beaten and tortured by electric shocks. We call upon Russia to bring to justice those responsible for disappearances, including that of Ervin Ibragimov. We call for the release of Mejlis Deputy Chairman Chigos and Umerov. In Kyrgyz Republic, extremism restrictions disproportionately impact ethnic Uzbeks. In occupied South Ossetia and Abkhazia, ethnic Georgians face restrictions on their rights. In Moldova, the government has failed to pass laws affirming the autonomous region of Gagauzia. We should express our legitimate concern for the rights of minorities without inflammatory rhetoric or destabilizing intent. Russia's occupation of Crimea and instigation of the conflict in eastern Ukraine are classic cases of aggression rationalized on manufactured ethnic pretexts. We are concerned about mob attacks on Roma and Sinti in Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and Ukraine. And with that, I will urge all to read our written statement, which is more extensive, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Next on my list, I have Switzerland, followed by the regional Bulgarian national cultural autonomy of the Republic of Crimea, named after Vasil Helendarsky. Switzerland, The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Modérateur.
Thank you very much indeed. Switzerland, which has a number of diverse communities, both from language and religion and indeed culture, attaches great importance to the right of individuals belonging to national minorities. Managing diversity for national interest is one of the priorities of our governments and our civil society. Switzerland is convinced of the determinant role played by human rights protection, and particularly those of national minorities, and that's why we particularly attach value to the work of the High Commissioner for National Minorities, and we welcome the new appointment to this post in the light of the experience of the High Commissioner. Integration is the key to democratic stability. We need the conditions in place to ensure that everyone, including minorities, have the feeling not only of belonging, but also of effective participation in the economic, cultural, social, and political life of the country. So it's a challenge for Switzerland to try and develop good practices in this area, and that's why we established a working group on improving the living conditions of the nomad living, encouraged a culture of Yenish, Sinti and Roma people in Switzerland, and that included active participation by the Yenish, Sinti and Roma people. A set of measures was recommended and are now serving as a basis for a plan of action of the Swiss Confederation. So that's one answer to Mr. Restes and the question that he asked. So our recommendation to include is the involvement of minorities in public life, and particularly those having a direct impact on them. That cannot be limited to a simple formal representation. It has to be active. So we would recommend to participant states to ensure that individuals belonging to minorities can be full social actors, and that their participation can have a significant impact on policy and decisions. Thank you very much indeed, Moderator.
Thank you very much for those comments. Next on the list is the regional Bulgarian national cultural autonomy of the Republic of Crimea, named after Pasil Helendarsky.
We have point of order, Mr. Moderator, excuse me.
Thank you, and I cede the floor on the basis of the point of order.
The delegation of Ukraine would like to confirm that in Ukrainian Autonomous Republic of Crimea, according to Ukrainian legislation, there were no and there is no any national cultural autonomies, as you just said the speakers belong to. Such entities, national cultural autonomies, are registered and controlled only according to the Russian Federation law on the national cultural autonomies. And in case of Crimea, they are controlled, established by Russian occupation authorities. By giving the floor to such representatives, you, Mr. Moderator, and OSCE ODIHR, that is organizing this event, are violating the OSCE finding principles. You go against the previous ODIHR and HCNM practice of rejection of illegal application of the Russian law on the occupied territories of Ukraine, and it could be interpreted as indirect recognition of the alteration of the status of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol that United Nations General Assembly called upon international organization to refrain from. So, taking into account all said, that it is not this entity is controlled by the Russian occupation authorities in Crimea, we request therefore the speaker to be ruled out of order and to leave the room. I thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, which are understood and noted. HCNM, ODIHR and the chairmanship fully support and adhere to the principle of freedom of association and freedom of expression, as well as to consensus-based decisions. I would call on all participants to adhere to the same principles. I will give this floor to the next speaker on the understanding that he or she speaks in the capacity which they are registered.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, to explain things, I'd like to say to the colleague from Ukraine that our organization was set up in 1991. It was re-registered in 2014. So it is on that basis that I think we can participate in this meeting. But I would like to draw colleagues' attention to the fact that there is a lot of misunderstanding about the situation in Crimea. I think people should visit Crimea before they say anything about about the situation prevailing there. Defending human rights is a duty of the Republic of Crimea, its decision makers, its leaders, and those leaders do consider the various cultural aspects to be taken into consideration. At the present time, there are 3 official languages, Russian, Ukrainian, and Crimean Tatar languages. And all of those peoples and other peoples as well are given the possibility freely to develop and to associate. Now, as a representative of my organization set up in 1991, I can tell you that there was in the past a practice of repression of ethnic and religious groups. At the present time, our group, the group of Bulgarians, the Bulgarian National Cultural Autonomy, are able to engage in our activities freely and without hindrance. Yes, I'm number 8 on the speakers list.
Of order raised, and I'm required to cede the floor under our rules of engagement. United States of America.
Thank you, moderator. Can we inquire of the speaker whether he is speaking as an official entity of some kind or whether he's speaking as a non-governmental organization? Because I think that's quite relevant to the point that was raised earlier.
I am taking the floor as a representative of a civil society organization.
Thank you very much.
May I continue my statement?
Continue, although your time is out, so I would ask you to conclude, please.
Yes.
So, as I've said, to claim that religious and ethnic minorities are being repressed in Crimea at the present time is simply not in accordance with the reality. And I'll just take advantage of this opportunity to provide a copy of this book, which sets out the various processes underway in Crimea since 2014, and it will answer many of the questions that people may have about the Republic of Crimea. Thank you.
Next on my speakers list, I have Latvia, followed by Hungary. Latvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. While fully subscribing to the EU statement, let me in my national capacity share some good examples taken by the Latvian government in protection of rights of persons belonging to national minorities. These rights are not only written in the Constitution, but also vividly practiced in the real life. Bilingual education is an integral part of Latvian education system, which aims to acquire both the Latvian and minority language skills. The government provides state-funded national minority education programs in 7 minority languages, which are Polish, Belarusian, Ukrainian, Estonian, Lithuanian, Hebrew, and Russian. In total, there are 109 schools that implement minority education programs. 2 of the minority schools are ranked among the 5 best in the country. As a result of successful integration policy, in recent years, the Latvian language skills among persons belonging to national minorities has improved considerably, especially among the youth. According to the recent study, more than 94% of persons belonging to national minorities can communicate in Latvian. The state's support for education and minority languages in Latvia is unique and exceeds that of many other European countries. Our approach and long-term experience is used by the Office of the High Commissioner of National Minorities as the best practice to be introduced in other OSCE countries. Regarding the issue of Roma integration, Latvia is actively implementing the EU co-founded Rights, Equality and Citizenship Programme for the year 2040-2020. Just recently, the second phase of the project was approved by the Cabinet of Ministers and will be carried out during this and next year. A special accent is devoted in establishing and support Roma mediators, whose role will be to promote better dialogue between Roma families and local government institutions like schools, social services, as well as the State Employment Agency. Let me conclude by reassuring that national minorities and their culture is an integral part of Latvia's society, and we are glad to learn that our experience can be used in other countries in the OSCE region. Full text of the statement is available on the conference website. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention. Next on my list, I have Hungary, followed by Unis dans la diversité linguistique. Hungary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We fully align ourselves with the statement delivered on behalf of the EU, but let me share with you some remarks in my national capacity. In our view, it has key importance that states should carry out their actions with regard to national minorities in good faith, bearing in mind the international political and legal commitments. We would like to stress that these documents only define minimum standards in the field of protection of national minorities. States should also comply with recommendations of several international bodies, such as the OSCE HDIM or the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. In the Copenhagen document, states also undertook to take effective measures at national, regional and local level to foster understanding and tolerance, particularly in education, culture and information. In the case of Hungarian minorities living abroad, we often experience the lack of effective measures of such kind in various ways. Some states, by administrative measures, for example, hinder fundamental minority rights, such as the use of mother tongue, the use of symbols, or the educational mother tongue. In this context, let me highlight a worrying recent phenomenon. In Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada adopted a law on education in the second and final reading on the 5th September. Article 7 of the bill significantly violates the rights of the Hungarian minority to receive education in their mother tongue. In general, the law drastically curbs the already acquired level of minority rights in education and language use. The new law, if signed in this form, would have a detrimental effect on Hungarian language education system in Transcarpathia, with the possibility to fully liquidating the Hungarian language educational institutions. Based on the above mentioned, we recommend participating states guaranteeing of education at all levels on minority tongue plays a very important role in increasing the productive capacities of minorities. States should allow the use of minority language in areas where language speakers are traditionally present and there is a need for the use of such language. In their legislation and media policies, states should promote the use of minority languages, refrain from introducing restrictive legal and policy measures such as mandatory state language quotas. It is particularly important for the media not to convey a negative, prejudicial picture of national minorities and give no room for hate speech against them. Thank you. The full statement will be circulated.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Unis dans la diversité linguistique, followed by Azerbaijan. Unis dans la diversité linguistique, the floor is yours.
Cher Monsieur le
Moderator, thank you. Representatives, my name is Emmanuel Merluz and I represent the NGO Unité dans la diversité linguistique, which is designed to promote the use of the language of Brittany, Breton. It's spoken by 100,000 people, and the vast majority of them are over 75. At the beginning of the 20th century, more than 1 million people spoke this language. If France's attitude doesn't change quickly to the Breton language, there'll only be 20,000 speakers less, a loss of 98% of the speakers. UNESCO has classified the language as a seriously threatened one. Since the French Revolution, France has been opposed to minority languages in France. Abbé Gregor, who was one of the figures of the French Revolution, proposed killing the languages outside of the centre in the name of public education. In 1973, Georges Pompidou affirmed that there was no place for regional languages in Europe, that France wanted to leave its impression on. In 1999, Jacques Chirac refused to ratify the European Charter of Minority Languages. In 2012, Nicolas Sarkozy confirmed at a meeting in Marseille that there was no intention to ratify the same charter. Paul Mullock in 2016 made a proposed bill in favor of minority languages, which was cut short by the President François Hollande's party, counting the vote of 8 absent members when the vote was taken. In 2016, a project for centralizing radio production was approved, which would further weaken broadcasts in the Breton language. The full statement is available for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next on my list, I have Azerbaijan, followed by Ukraine. The delegate from Azerbaijan.
Multiculturalism is manifested both in domestic and foreign policy of Azerbaijan. One of the most important indicators of multiculturalism nature of domestic policy of Azerbaijan is protection of ethno-cultural values of all peoples living in the state. Presently, there are representatives of 60 ethnic groups in Azerbaijan. Rights and freedoms of ethnic minorities are protected in the constitution. For the first time in the post-Soviet space, Azerbaijan adopted the law titled Protection of Rights and Freedom of National Minorities Living in the Republic of Azerbaijan. Furthermore, the Republic of Azerbaijan is a party to international conventions on protection of national minorities. National minorities have their own organizations, cultural centers. The government of Azerbaijan sponsors radio broadcasts in Kurdish, Lezgin, Talysh, Georgian, Russian, and Armenian. Ethnic minorities of Azerbaijan publish their newspapers and journals. There are primary and secondary schools in languages of some of national minorities. National minorities are widely represented in legislative, executive, judicial branches of power. There are about 50 NGOs, national cultural centers, social unions, and societies dealing with social, economic, and cultural issues of national minorities. Along with local NGOs, there are also some foreign NGOs which are dealing with the problems, investigating the problems of national minorities. Thus, as we see, the nationality policy of Azerbaijan, which is an integral part of multiculturalism policy, promotes integration of all peoples living in Azerbaijan. This, in turn, has a positive impact on socio-economic development of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Ukraine, followed by Serbia. Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We feel sorry that a GMI was misused today to legitimize actions made with flagrant violations of the OSCE founding principles, in particular those of respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the inviolability of frontiers. It must be prevented in the future. At the same time, Ukrainian government continues its politics oriented on support of the fruitful and effective cooperation with the different organizations of the national minorities. This spring, the Special Expert Council in the sphere of ethnopolitics has been created, and it has had several meetings so far. At the same time, with the same affiliation with the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, another advice body has been created in the Council of Ethnic National Organization of Ukraine, which unites all 7 leaders of existing umbrella organization of the national minorities. The main task of both councils is producing the effective recommendations as well as the fruitful consulting in the sphere of implementing the state politics in the corresponding dimension. Government pays a special attention to the subject of Roma integration into the Ukrainian society. After many years of discussion, last November, the Interministerial Working Group for implementation of the Roma strategy has had its first meeting. The working group unites representatives of 13 central state governmental bodies as well all 25 the regional ones. As a result, 5 sub-working groups oriented on the practical work in the concrete dimensions had been created. I mean the group in spheres of culture and education, housing, social service and healthcare, legislation and legal protection, organizational question and media. Also, with the support of the International Renaissance Foundation, a special structure, a secretariat for solving any practical aspects of the activity of the interministerial working group was founded several months ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on my list I have Serbia, followed by Human Rights Vision. The representative of Serbia.
Thank you. Thank you. Social inclusion of Roma men and women remained one of priority of the government of the Republic of Serbia, which is visible about it within the action plan for chapter 23. The strategy for social inclusion of Roma 2016 to 2055. Action plan for implementation of the strategy 2017 to 2018. And operative conclusion from the Roma inclusion seminar in June 2015. The action plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti within the OSCE area suggests development and a comprehensive national strategy of action plan to improve the situation of Roma and Sinti. The coordination body for monitoring to implementation of the strategy has been established, and the Deputy Prime Minister is the chairperson. The member of the coordination body decision makes from all relevant ministers. And the expert group has been formed, and the member of the expert group are representative of the state institution, but also of the civil society organization and National Council of the Roma National Minority. The expert mission of the European Commission of Roma Inclusion was organized in June this year. The expert has a chance to meet all relevant ministers and institutions, as well as civil society organization and the target group during field visits. Roma Inclusion Seminar is organized every 2 years in cooperation with European Commission, and it is one opportunity to assess the progress and formulate key priorities in a form of operation conclusion to the next 2 years period. The next Roma Inclusion Seminar will take place in the second part of October this year. Regional Council for Cooperation provides support to government institutions in the countries in the region during the process of Roma inclusion. Serbia is the host of the Roma Action Team of the Regional Council to Cooperation, whose office is placed in Belgrade. And as far as proposal made by the USA delegation to have the representative of Pristina around this table, we would like to underline that our position remains unchanged and we cannot agree with such proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on my list, I have Human Rights Vision, followed by Albania. Human Rights Vision, the floor
Thank
is
you,
yours.
dear Mr. Moderator. In Tajikistan, the most numerous national minorities are Uzbeks. Basically, their basic rights are not violated. However, they are not so often admitted to elections as candidates for elected bodies. It's not easy for them to become deputies, mayors, even for the territory where they constitute the majority. In parliament and other, there are no representatives of Uzbek nationality. The second by composition ethnic minority in Tajikistan are Kyrgyz. In society, there is better and loyal attitude toward them. The only problem, according to the recent observations faced by Kyrgyz, is the language that becomes the cause of discrimination. Another Tajik ethnic group is Pamiri and Yagnobi, where too many problems have accumulated. The main problem is protection from the disappearance of their language. It's practically forbidden to speak in local languages of Pamiri and Yagnobi in public institutions and at official events. The security forces in the Badakhshan sector are especially concerned that there wouldn't be unreliable employees, that is Pamiris. In addition, in Tajikistan live Roma. There are no special schools for Roma. No language support, no cultural center. They do not go to school, do not get education, although they live all their lives in Tajikistan. When one Roma representative took the initiative to create a religious center for Roma, he was ridiculed and subjected to abuse. On behalf of Human Rights Vision Foundation, we call on the government of Tajikistan to take an emergency program of practical measures to protect groups of Pamir and Yagnob representatives of national minorities as soon as possible. For this purpose, it's necessary to consider the possibility of creating a local television in the language of Pamirians and Yagnobians. It's also necessary to create and provide courses on the study of the state language in the territory where the Kyrgyz population predominantly lives, creating in parallel all the conditions for learning in schools in their native language, create all necessary conditions for local Roma for permanent residence and grant them citizenship. To improve relations with the Uzbek ethnic minority, it's necessary to create joint programs with Uzbekistan to normalize inter-ethnic and international relations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for those remarks. Next on my list, I have Albania, followed by National Forum Ossetia Accuses. Albania, the floor is yours.
Mr. Moderator, fully committed with the EU statement, I would like to add the following remarks in my national capacity. Albania is committed to fulfill the international obligation for the respect and protection of human rights and minorities in accordance with the international obligations. Albania has ratified several conventions on human rights as well as the Framework Convention of Council of Europe for the protection of national minorities. And I would like to stress that Albania has a positive balance related to the protection of minorities, and climate of respect and tolerance prevails in Albania. The Constitution and domestic legal framework guarantee the right of persons belonging to minorities, the right to declare their ethnicity, to maintain and develop their national identities, the right of education in mother tongue, their culture, religion, their fundamental freedoms and rights. In the framework of EU integration process, one of the main objectives is the adaptation of the comprehensive legal framework on minorities, taking into account the recommendation of international organization roadmap on 5 priorities of the European Commission, foresees as objective the improvement of the legislation and policies for the protection of minorities following the broad consultation process and taking into account the recommendations of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities of the Council of Europe. In this context, Albania institution during 2016-2017 worked on the preparation of the specific law on minorities, based on the European standards, best European practices, international expertise, and taking into account the specific condition and needs of Albania. The process of preparation of the drafting law on minorities was supported by the international expertise of the Council of Europe. A broad consultation process took place by involving certain central institutions, local self-government units, independent institutions, minorities associations, civil society, and international organizations. With regard to the consultation process, on 12 April 2017, Albanian government adopted the draft law on minorities, and in accordance to domestic legislation, in order to enter into force, it will be adopted by the Albanian parliament. Thank you.
Falmendeert, thank you. And next we have National Forum Ossetia Accuses, followed by Latvian Human Rights Committee. National Forum, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, our human rights protection organization has often raised the question of the violation of ethnic Ossetians' rights in their traditional lands in Georgia, particularly with regard to inhabitants and migrants from the Mtskheta-Mtianeti region. In recent years, we've seen the Georgian authorities empty this area of Ossetians, particularly those who have entitlement to property either through inheritance rights or other reasons. Whenever Ossetians try to get legal documents for their property, they fall onto a blacklist of undesired people in this region of Georgia. And this has increased recently. Recent events reflect this when ethnic Ossetians on a pilgrimage to their historical homeland was stopped entering not only the place for their prayer but also their traditional homes. We have seen this and we see it as an attempt to completely empty this part of the region of ethnic Ossetians. There are cases of people not being allowed to their homes, not being allowed to get title to their homes. Our repeated raising of concerns has unfortunately not gained the attention of international human rights organizations registered in Georgia or local human rights organizations. Unfortunately, ODIHR and the High Commissioner for National Minorities have also shown indifference to the problem of Ossetians in the Mtanyeti region. And we would call on international human rights organizations and Georgian ones to carry out monitoring of this issue in this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next, I have Latvian Human Rights Committee, followed by Justice and Liberty for All Committee. Latvian Human Rights Committee, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Our first recommendation for Latvia is to restore the network of minority bilingual schools and to allow them free choice of models of bilingual education. In the last 2 years, 9 minority schools have been closed, and this year government regulations have been adopted to deprive their pupils of the right of choosing the language of answer in the exams, both graduating the basic and the high school. This should be seen in the context of the government declaration of the last year, which announces a plan to switch all public schools to Latvian as the only language of instruction. Our second recommendation is to abolish language requirements for local councillors, MPs, and leaders of non-governmental organizations. The requirements for non-governmental organizations have been adopted this year and will come into force in January. Concerning local councillors, in December, for the first time, a local councillor has been removed by court from his office for allegedly not speaking Latvian good enough, although he was elected 3 times in a row, and this year he was elected again, and the government authorities again initiate his language skills check. And our third recommendation is to abolish the victimless offences in the Code of Administrative Violations and not to adopt new ones. Such offences include distribution of bilingual information by public authorities, excluding some exceptional cases now already, and the Parliament currently considers a draft law including prohibition for sending bilingual bulletins and catalogues for private persons too. Our more detailed statement and recommendations can be consulted on the website, I hope, for this session's materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Justice and Liberty for All Committee, followed by Russian Association for International Cooperation. Justice and Liberty, it's your floor. Thank you.
We'll be speaking in French.
My name is Sergi, and I'm taking the floor in the name of the JLC. Let me quote, perhaps Hitler didn't kill enough people. That doesn't come from a neo-Nazi site. It is the mayor of Chauville in France who said this, and when he was accused in justice before the judiciary, he said that he was simply expressing his views, and he continues to be a mayor. And he has not been removed from office. Now, we believe in civil society that member states of the OSCE have too much impunity, and they shouldn't be teaching others of human rights. Manuel Valls, when he was prime minister, stated, and I quote, "The Roma should go back to Romania or to Bulgaria." Now, this statement shows that France has no real policy of integration of the Roma community, and primitive racism is the standard when you talk about the Roma. And in the field, this means that representatives of the Republic, mayors, can destroy Roma camps, burn them down when the inhabitants are absent. Come to France and see how the Roma live there. and therefore the JLC considers that the OSCE should be more present in the field, make it possible for the Roma to defend their rights, to choose their own representatives, and have access to employment and be heard out. There should be clear directives addressed to member states, to participating states, in order that Roma not be treated as exiled migrants. Countries like mine should meet their commitments under international law. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, I have the Russian Association for International Cooperation, followed by the Council on American Islamic Relations. Russian Association, the floor is yours.
The civil society of Russia is very concerned by the growing trend for dividing lines to occur in Europe. Everyone knows that when the USSR ceased to exist, 25 million Russians have found themselves outside the boundaries of the Russian Federation. They are cut off from their homeland. And there is often a policy of repression of those individuals, especially in the Baltic states. Russian language and Russian education is something that is guaranteed only in Belarus, even though there are many post-Soviet states with 15 or even 25% of Russians. There is open and unacceptable discrimination of basic rights of these Russian speakers in many countries. This is also occurring now in Ukraine. There have been new measures introduced to prohibit education in the Russian language. And all of this means that the issue of treatment of Russians in the post-Soviet area has not been resolved. And for a long-lasting peace to be ensured, it would be important to do away with this myth that the Russians are to be blamed for anything negative that is occurring. If that discrimination were to be lifted, that would provide stability and peace. These Russian speakers would then feel at home in the states in which they live, and they would be able to keep their links with their homeland. I mean, the Francophones in Canada, the Swedish speakers in Finland, and the Crimean Tatars in Crimea feel at home. We have people in the Mejlis who are Tatars, despite the fact that it is an even smaller percentage of the population than the ones I've mentioned. Thank you.
Next on the list is the Council on American Islamic Relations, followed by Kyrgyzstan. Council on American Islamic Relations.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Hussam Elush, and I'm with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, representing American Muslims. Islam and Muslims have always been part of America's history since before its inception. There are about 6 million American Muslims. The American Muslim community is the most ethnically diverse religious community in America. Highly educated, economically successful, proudly American, and sadly, one of the most targeted by hate rhetoric and incidents. Islamophobia is at peak in America, with a large Islamophobia industry that includes over 70 entities and a yearly budget of over $50 million, working on defaming, intimidating, dehumanizing, and marginalizing Muslims through misinformation, political targeting, hate rallies, school bullying, anti-Muslim legislation, and normalized bigotry and discrimination by various government agencies and private sectors. The campaign of bigotry has had significant success, as reflected in the alarming spike in the number of reported anti-Muslim incidents in recent years. Anti-Muslim bigotry is not merely the product of the Trump administration's divisive rhetoric. It is a reflection and continuation of my country's long history of government-sponsored and approved racism and abuse targeting various communities, starting with Native Americans, African Americans, and other minorities, Chinese, Italian, Mormon, Catholic, Jewish, Japanese, Latino, and now Muslim Americans. Islamophobia is the product of a reorganized and rebranded white nationalism. President Trump's xenophobic rhetoric and executive orders, such as the Muslim ban,
have certainly helped fuel and normalize that racism. Islamophobia and xenophobia in America and Europe can only be defeated if understood in that context of white supremacy and white nationalism, and now amplified by an agenda-driven right-wing pro-Israel entity or groups. Our recommendations to the OSCE: engage American Muslims, challenge the growing hate and xenophobic rhetoric and policies, including within the US and European governments, especially those policies falsely justified under national security and counterterrorism. Last but not least, advocate for the freedom and human rights of all minorities in America and Europe. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Kyrgyzstan, followed by Be My Friend Visoko. Kyrgyzstan, the floor is yours.
Уважаемый господин председатель.
Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to extend a welcome to everybody at this meeting and wish us all a second fruitful week of work. We are actively carrying out to fulfill our commitments under the bodies of the UN, including the recommendations on the Committee on Racial Discrimination. We are an active participant in the application of the OSCE's High Commissioner on National Minorities in many different areas. We are harmonizing our inter-ethnic relations and promoting long-term integration. One particular action here has been our national strategy for 2013-2016 that really promoted inter-ethnic understanding. We'll be continuing that national strategic program. We will be particularly working on the inter-ethnic relational aspect of it. One issue has been establishing the legal basis for this. We have official posts at the government level and including an official office for ethnic relations, which mainstreams issues relating to this issues such as language and identity throughout government policy. We are establishing the infrastructure required, particularly we have a dispute resolution mechanism to promote peace, to identify early potential conflicts. We also have a monitoring center. We have specific centers as well in areas of high population density of ethnic groups. We also recognize the importance of language and are adopting special measures in this regard to achieve the tasks we've set ourselves. We look forward to working together with the High Commissioner, Lamberto Zanier, to further deepen work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. Next is Be My Friend Visoko, followed by National Association of Northern Epirus, 1914. Be My Friend Visoko, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marisa Halilovic. I'm coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina, presenting the NGO Roma Youth Initiative Be My Friend from Visoko. I would like to get your attention focused on existing problems of Roma in Bosnia and Herzegovina through including Roma through education. Bosnia and Herzegovina hasn't got financial support for education and programs in transition to mainstream education for Roma children and youth. Since our government of Bosnia and Herzegovina accepted the action plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti within the OSCE area for education, I would like to recommend to our government, who is working a lot on enrolling or including Roma citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina through every aspect, to pay more attention on Roma youth through education, on retraining, additional qualifications, and extracurricular education. From my personal experience as a young Roma woman, our government should provide more educational programs for Roma youth, both men and women, more Roma experts in various fields, but especially in education. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is the National Association of Northern Epirus, 1914.
Thank you.
Followed by Human Rights Movement, Biz Dunio, Kyrgyzstan, and I apologize for that pronunciation. National Association, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Honorable representatives, for yet one more year, the national Hellenic minority in Albania, which resides in the North Epirus region, has experienced a harsh violation of its human rights. In the Greek minority villages of the municipality of Iniki, in the area of Agis Aranda, foreigners often show up and claim to be owners of large areas as descendants of landowners of the Ottoman Empire and ask of the indigenous residents to give them their property. In the municipality of Himara, on the pretext of a development plan for tourism, the Albanian government, in cooperation with the local authorities, is trying to demolish buildings that belong to Greeks in order to install Albanian settlers in the area. The geography textbooks in the Albanian schools, although there were relevant bilateral agreements signed in the recent years, continue to include expansionist references against Greece and other neighboring countries. We also denounce the tolerance of the Albanian authorities to the terrorist activity of Tahir Veliu's chauvinist group, which burned Greek flags that he stole from public places and Greek houses in 2 towns and 5 villages in northern Epirus, in order to terrorize the minority. All of the above serve what appears to be a state-organized plan for a velvet ethnic cleansing of the area from the indigenous national Hellenic minority. Ladies and gentlemen, the solution for the survival of the Greeks of northern Epirus in their ancestral homes is firstly the implementation of the international treaties that protect ethnic minorities, and secondly the implementation of the 1914 Protocol of Corfu signed by Albania, which provides the autonomy statute with many other ethnic minorities in European countries enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is the Human Rights Movement, Biz Dunio, Kyrgyzstan, followed by International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful People. Human Rights Movement, the floor is yours, and apologies for the pronunciation.
Good morning. Thank you, moderator. In 1993, the OSCE participating states have already expressed their concerns about the rise in aggressive nationalism, racism. That was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Now, Kyrgyzstan is a unique country. We consider ourselves to be a victim of Stalinism because we have dozens of national minorities that were deported to our country from Russia, from Ukraine, from elsewhere, and that were repressed. And so the basic strategy must be to integrate these people, to make it possible for them to live equally. I mean, we have gone through 2 revolutions, an ethnic conflict in 2010, and we have an Article 299 of the Criminal Code, which is a threat, a menace for national minorities, and as stated by the delegation of the United States. And we can give you many examples of actual threats of illegal arrest and detention of Uzbeks, for instance. Another menace of this article shows that it really must be removed, and we would call on the Commissioner, Mr. Zani, to urge that. And there is a draft law on citizenship which will throw us back to the Middle Ages. If someone says, I don't like the government, well, they'll be stripped of their citizenship. On the 12th of September, a journalist was charged was sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment simply because of a book that he wrote about Muslims. But we must respect all religions. And journalists, opposition journalists, are put on blacklists of extremists. There's a new government in Kyrgyzstan, and if they don't respect to human rights as a value that will result in a lot of social tension. So I would appeal to the Commissioner to take a hard look at Kyrgyzstan. This is a pre-election period, and there must be equal opportunities for all people, including the Roma, freely to participate in these democratic elections. Thank you.
Spasiba, thank you. Next we have
International Platform.
International Platform, Global Rights of Peaceful People, followed by Slovenia. International Platform.
Mr. Moderator, distinguished experts, I'm the president of the International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful People, and we consider that the new school reform in Ukraine adopted on 5 September of this year, which provides for full Ukrainization, is a violation of democratic rights and results in discrimination of national minorities. What is the essence of this reform? Millions of Ukrainians cannot teach their children in their mother tongue. Second, the introduction of a 12-year period of education rather than 11 years. A third aspect is that this reform will require an additional 3 billion euros, which the government doesn't have. So many of the points provided for on the reform will remain a dead letter. But the essential objective of the reform is to prohibit teaching in the Russian language. Fourth, increasing the wages of some teachers will result in others being let go because the fund is not being increased. Instead of 22 subjects, there will be 9. Instead of chemistry, biology, anatomy, geography, and astronomy, there will be courses on nature and man or man and the world. Obstinate directors will be limited to 6-year contracts. There will be a lot of corruption resulting from the fact that there will be certain official contracts given to some teachers and not to others. The number of schools will be reduced by 30%. And there will be another point, namely criminal liability for saying anything negative about Ukrainian symbols, about the regime in power, or about the state as such. And so, in practice, the new law is doing away with one of the crucial standards, namely the right for those who are not native Ukrainian speakers to receive education in their mother tongue. And so we recommend that the OSCE put pressure on the Ukrainian authorities to bring this law in line with international standards and do away with aggressive nationalism and chauvinism. Thank you.
Spasiba, thank you. Next we have Slovenia, followed by the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitis. Representative of Slovenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia devotes great attention to the rights of national minorities. It is not coincidence that one set of guidelines of OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities from 2012 is titled the Ljubljana Guidelines on Integration of Diverse Societies. Traditional national minorities, as well as the Roma community, enjoy in Slovenia high legal protection, including collective rights. The Italian and Hungarian national minorities are directly represented in representative bodies of local self-government and in the Slovenian National Assembly, and the Roma minority is represented in the municipal councils of 19 local communities. The Ljubljana Guidelines are today as topical as 5 years ago. The aim of the Ljubljana Guidelines is to assist states by policies for integration of diverse societies and so help them to avoid ethnic tensions and conflicts, what result in security, stability and prosperity of states. One of the basic principles in Ljubljana Guidelines is the principle of good and democratic governance that serves the needs and interests of entire state population, including minorities. State policies should also protect and promote linguistic diversity, including linguistic rights of minorities. Besides giving opportunity to all persons belonging to national minorities to learn good enough their minority language in schools, also signs, inscriptions, place names, street names, and other topographical indications in minority language or bilingually are of great importance for the individual and collective identity of persons belonging to national minorities. Mr. President, to conclude, I would like to confirm the goodwill of Slovenia for the promotion of minority rights in the framework of OSCE and its support for the work of the High Commissioner on National Minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next on the list is the Ecumenical Federation of Constantinopolitis, followed by the Czech Republic. The Ecumenical Federation, the floor is yours.
The severe violations took place against Greek Orthodox community of Istanbul during the years 1923-2003. They are all well documented and presented on several meetings of OSCE and other international organizations. The most visible consequence of these anti-minority measures against the Greek Orthodox minority of Istanbul is the fact that 98% of the population of this community is presently living under expatriated conditions in various countries. Although the last years some progress has been achieved, serious problems remain to be addressed and urgent measures are still needed to be taken in order to alleviate the injustices and violations of the past. The most important ones are: 1. The prohibition of elections of administrative councils and the minority welfare foundations, which overthrows the positive developments during 2004-2012. 2. The non-recognition of minority administration to 15 minority foundations being under fused merged Mazbut status. 3. The necessity of the establishment of a coordinating body for the 70 Greek Orthodox minority welfare foundations. 4. Alleviating the difficulties in guaranteeing the individual property rights of the members of the expatriated Greek community by the establishment of an advisory service under the embassment of Turkey. 5. The continuing illegal occupation of the Greek Orthodox churches and their 50 properties in the district of Karaköy by the descendants of Eren Erol family, a self-declared Turkish Orthodox Church. 6. The reopening of the Theological School of Halki. 7. The necessity of remedy and reparation measures for the survival of the Greek Orthodox community of Istanbul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could take a moment also to remind all participants of the standard procedure here that it's preferable if you can introduce yourself when you take the floor. Next we have the Czech Republic, followed by Pavy Point Traveller and Roma Center. Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We align with the EU statement. Let me start by thanking the introducers for their very inspiring presentations. We would like to inform about new positive developments regarding Roma integration in the Czech Republic, which remains one of the priorities of the Czech government. The Czech government has continued to implement the strategy for Roma integration up to 2020. Roma representatives have been involved in deciding on Roma integration issues as much as possible. Regarding inclusive education, the Czech government has continued to promote joint education and equal access to education for all pupils. It has introduced supportive measures necessary to meet the educational needs of each pupil. Also, since 1st September 2017, compulsory preschool education has been introduced. It applies to children aged 4 and older. At the same time, the rule of free of charge last year of kindergarten is preserved in order to ensure that all children enter primary education successfully. These measures support the integration of Roma pupils into the mainstream education. The National Roma Contact Point has successfully completed a project called Activation and Empowerment of Roma Stakeholders by the National Roma Platform. Its objective was to strengthen the cooperation and dialogue of all relevant stakeholders of Roma integration and empower Roma to effectively take part in identifying the needs of Roma minority and solving their problems. Regarding the memorial site of Roma Holocaust in Lety, we are pleased to inform that the negotiations on the purchase of the farm located on the site were successful. On 21st August 2017, the Czech government approved the purchase of the premises of the farm for the purpose of its removal. The final design of the memorial site will be consulted with Roma survivors, Roma representatives, and also the Government Council for Roma Minority Issues. Finally, the national campaign against Roma racism, and hate violence has continued. It is relevant when addressing anti-Gypsyism, hate speech, and violence against Roma. The full statement will be circulated. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Pavy Point Traveller and Roma Center, followed by Fundación Secretariado Gitano. Apologies for that pronunciation. Pavy Point Traveller Center.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Tika Muntean. I work with Roma project in Pavy Point Traveller and Roma Center in Ireland. Pavy Point is a national organization working for human rights for Irish travelers and Roma. This is the fourth year that travelers have been formally recognized by the Irish government as a minority ethnic group. As a member of Roma community, I am very glad to see this positive development for travelers in Ireland as we work together in solidarity. In keeping with this recognition, we ask that travelers will also give visibility in the language being used by the OSCE. In June 2017, the government launched the second National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy. We welcome the Irish National Traveller Roma Inclusion Strategy 2017-2021. In principle, the document contains very positive action. There are also major gaps in the document that should be addressed. For example, there is no action to address Roma accommodation in the strategy. Even now, many Roma live in really bad accommodation. We call on member states to meet their obligation to implement national Roma strategies for the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, to support member states and to work with the European Commission in ensuring that happen. Accommodation. Ireland is experiencing a homeless crisis. However, travelers and Roma have been excluded from national responses to the houses and homeless crisis. Traveler accommodation budget was cut 90% between 2008 and 2013. Roma is living in severely accommodated conditions and in unsafe, abandoned buildings. We call on funding to be invested in Roma and traveler initiative in Ireland for a reinvestment in traveler accommodation. Also, we call in ODIHR to urge Ireland to ensure ethnic equality monitoring with a human rights framework. We call on ODIHR to urge a European Union to consider how Roma and travelers can have free movement in EU and have the human rights realized. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. Next is the Fundación Secretariado Gitano, followed by International Charitable Organization Roma Women Fund Chiricli. Fundación, the floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving us this opportunity. My name is Mari Carmen Cortés. I work in an NGO called Fundación Secretariado Gitano, who is an intercultural social non-profit organization that provides service for the development of the Roma community in Spain. Our mission is to promote to access of Roma to rights, service, good and social resources on an equal footing with the rest of the citizenry. Please let me inform you that our organization registered more than 1,050 cases of ethnic discrimination per year. The discrimination against Roma and Sinti is an important problem in many OSCE countries. A real commitment for all countries is needed to combat Romaphobia, paying special attention to Roma women and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual Roma people who suffer multiple discrimination for their ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. I want to remember that education is a basic human right, that many Roma and Sinti children live discrimination and segregation in education, and other countries should especially guarantee the right to the education for all Roma and Sinti children. For conclude, education is a base to access to a real citizenship. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. International charitable organization Roma Women Fund Chirically, followed by Georgia's Reforms Associates. International charitable organization.
Thank you. My name is Zola Kondur. I'm representing Roma Women Fund Chirically, Ukraine. The situation of Roma in Ukraine remains problematic. Roma face particular challenges in accessing quality education, medical assistance, housing, and civil registration documents. All these challenges are rooted in ongoing discrimination and anti-Gypsyism, which continues to be institutionalized among public officials and members of political parties. In the last 6 months, in addition to a number of cases of hate speech, we have witnessed the eviction of Roma communities in Kyiv and Lviv with the tacit and direct support of public authorities. While the Roma strategy and the Roma National Action Plan were developed and approved in 2013, these documents lack strategic objectives and targeted measures to account the real needs of Roma. To ensure the effective implementation of the strategy and the National Action Plan, the Interministerial Working Group on Roma National Action Plan under the Cabinet of Ministers was established in 2015. Unfortunately, for many reasons, the work of this group is not resulted in strengthened capacity of the ministries responsible for the coordination or implementation of the strategy and the National Action Plan. There is a high risk that this group will not affect the quality management of the National Action Plan implementation that is necessary in view of the lack of political will of the ministries that are members of this group. Monitoring of the National Action Plan's impact today demonstrates that changes are required and it must be done in line with the international standards. Recommendations to the Ukrainian national and regional authorities to collect comprehensive gender disaggregated official data on the number of Roma in Ukraine as well on their social economical situation in cooperation with Roma NGOs, Roma mediators. Special attention needed to Roma internally displaced people. To facilitate a formal review and undertake amendments of the National Action Plan and Regional Action Plan based on the progress and learning today, it is important to this review to undertake in close consultation with Roma NGOs. And the government of Ukraine needs to ensure discriminative acts by public officials and bodies are promptly investigated, publicly denounced, and restitution is provided to Roma victims. And the last recommendation is we appeal to ODIHR with the request to assist implementation of such initiatives as through targeting capacity building on regional and local authorities within the framework of the OSCE Roma and Sinti Action Plan, and through providing technical support to the government of Ukraine to develop a clear set of measurable indicators of the National Action Plan and 2020 policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Georgia's Reforms Associates, followed by Teachers and Parents Association Liberta. Georgia's Reforms Associates, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm Georgi Goguaze, and it is my pleasure to represent Georgia's Reforms Associates at the conference. I'd like to focus your attention on the challenges which Roma youth are facing today in Georgia. especially with the crucial emphasis on the status of young women and girls. Roma youth not only face the numerous barriers to civic integration currently, but also to the enjoyment of a life with dignity. Their human rights are often violated. Even though Georgia committed itself to the protection of Roma rights to the newly established National Action Plan, the level of vulnerability and marginalization of Roma people still remains. Starting from the problems in legislation, ending with the early enforced marriages, insufficient engagement of law enforcement bodies to prevent the domestic violence, it makes the life of Roma overloaded with daily challenges. It is therefore clear that massive efforts are in need to leave this deadlock. I'd like to recommend the government of Georgia to fulfill the commitments which is in according to the time frame of the National Action Plan. Also actively continue the process of issuing ID to Roma with less complicated procedures, to modify the civic code to ensure that minors cannot be legally married, and to provide the shelters to the girls and women, and issue the special programs for the people who are the victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we would have Teachers and Parents Association, Liberta, followed by Roma Youth Organization. Teachers and Parents Association, please, the floor is yours.
Приветствую, я Сурача Лимов.
Suraj Alimum. I represent the NGO Liberta, and I want to talk about the problems that the Roma have. There is little interest in their education. The language isn't of interest to the state. They're not interested in kindergartens or schools in the Roma language. Our forefathers weren't literate, and we haven't been able then to inherit our history, and little is being done to promote that. I think the state of Georgia needs to create a facilitating atmosphere for the Roma people so they can achieve their own realization through such things like education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list would be the Roma Youth Organization, followed by the Roma NGO Chachimo. Roma Youth Organization.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Siniša Senad Music. I'm Roma coming from Croatia. It was recommended, I will start with a recommendation, and first recommendation is to make the law, consume the law, enhance the law, to put in process people who are spreading the hate speech over the internet through the different platforms. The second thing is to monitoring comments on the online edition of the articles and newspaper and delete them as soon as possible. Also find the identity of this person who is spreading this hate speech. And the last one is make a national campaign focusing on anti-Gypsyism, fighting against discrimination towards Roma, so specifically towards Roma. Why I'm saying this is because in Croatia, the Roma people in every research is the most hated people in Croatia, like the national minority. In every society, so in Roma society as well, we have good and bad persons, but when every person should be blamed for their deeds, but when we're talking about discrimination towards Roma and other national minority, we are facing collective blame. A few days ago in Croatia, one person did some bad things, but after online edition of this article, he was recognized as Roma, so we had lots of comments, and comments were very frightening. It was like, we need to take that stinky gypsies and gave them each one bullet. I want to remind you all that during the World War II we had this example. More than 90% of Roma went away from Croatia. They were killed, but not by bullet, by the hammer and knives. So we really need to focus on this rising of racism. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we would have the Roma NGO Chachimo, followed by a Roma rights activist. Chachimo.
Дамы и господа, приветствую вас. Меня зовут
Buluski Nikolai, and I'm the chair or president of the NGO Chachime of Kharkov in Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine with regard to the violation of the Roma's rights and discrimination has worsened in previous years. The terrible situation, we see harassment against representatives of ethnic groups. We've seen the unlawful detention of representatives of Roma people, and we have seen deaths as well. Inciting hatred in internet, media, and repressing the language has been terrible. The radical national movements in Ukraine are exemplified by one called Karaspachi, where they have called on the population to destroy Roma settlements. And this is something which is a tendency not only in social media and media, but it is taking root in the consciousness of people. And one of the reflections of the situation that we have in taking place are those in Valshanov, where there was a mass shooting. The local representative invited the Roma people to some kind of dialogue, and then at 10 in the morning, armed people broke into the group, shooting, 5 injured, 1 killed, through a shot to the back. And the problem that we face then today is that this situation is slipping out of control because the person who should have been arrested for this shooting is still at large. We understand today that the situation is dreadful and that if it doesn't change, we will see the Roma minority becoming more closed in on itself. And this could lead to increased violence, further destabilization of the political situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have an individual Roma rights activist, followed by the Roma Rights Center of Moldova. If I could ask the next speaker to introduce herself, as I don't have her name. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Moderator, dear delegates, dear civil society representatives. My name is Natalia Dominica and I'm coming from Republic of Moldova. I'm a Roma rights activist. First of all, I'm grateful to ODIHR Contact Point for Roma and Sinti issues for supporting my participation at Human Dimension Implementation meeting. Today, I would like to draw your attention to the topic of national integrational strategy of Roma in the Republic of Moldova. In 2007, the Moldovan government adopted a set of measures to improve the situation of Roma in education, health, employment, and culture areas. Further, in 2011, they adopted the first comprehensive national document on Roma integration for a period of 4 years. Last year, in 2016, the government committed to continue their efforts on Roma integration. In this regard, it was adopted the 2016-2020 Roma Action Plan. Although the central authorities actively promote Roma integration, they still failed to allocate adequate budget for the implementation of Roma Action Plan. The government also lacked to monitor and to assess implementation of Roma action plans. A series of international human rights bodies raised their concerns about the lack of adequate financial resources for the implementation of Roma Action Plan and lack of effective monitoring and assessment. The current Roma Action Plan does not have any budget line for the implementation nor a monitoring and evaluation strategy. Although the document is supposed to be an inclusive one, it does not address the needs of Roma women, Roma youth, Roma LGBTQI, and Roma people with disabilities. Taking into account all said above, I would like to encourage the Moldovan government to urgently allocate relevant financial resources for the implementation of 2016-2020 Roma Action Plan. In addition, I would like to urge the central authorities to adopt a comprehensive monitoring and evaluation strategy and to establish a working group which will monitor the implementation of Roma Action Plan. Also, I would recommend Moldovan government to make amendments to the plan in order to make it inclusive for all vulnerable parts of Roma communities, such as Roma women, Roma youth, Roma LGBTQI, and Roma people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next on the list is the Roma Rights Center of Moldova, followed by Affirm Human Rights. Roma Rights Center, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am the president of a local Roma rights NGO called the Roma Rights Center of Moldova, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that although the Republic of Moldova has stated over the last 4 years that there is progress when it comes to ensuring the human rights of the Roma, that is not something that individual Roma citizens are experiencing. Although the conditions for integration of Roma people are set out in an appropriate legal framework, but there is a difficulty with actual enforcement by both the central and local authorities when dealing with individual Roma people. The decision makers are simply not implementing. The Roma people of the Republic of Moldova find themselves in difficult social, cultural, and economic circumstances, which has a negative effect on the possibility for them to enjoy their political, civil, and cultural rights. The Roma in Moldova are one of the most rejected groups in the country. They run the risk of being marginalized by the official authorities and also by non-state entities. Human rights defense organizations that specialize in combating discrimination of Roma and deal with individual cases state that the following cases are the most frequent. First of all, the police continues to discriminate against Roma and to undermine their rights on every occasion. And other official bodies of the state administration are also not open to Roma issues. And when dealing with specific cases, they do not carry out investigations that are required when the rights of Roma are being undermined. Quite the contrary, they simply close the case. Thank you for your attention.
Very much. Next on the list is Affirm Human Rights, followed by People's Assembly of Kyrgyzstan. Affirm Human Rights, the floor is yours.
My name is Jennifer Obasaki, and I'm here on behalf of Affirm Human Rights, which is an NGO established due to the fact that we felt that a lot of migrants coming into the United Kingdom had barriers in accessing information and support and resources. It was established to try and break down these barriers. Even though we live in a global society, it's clear that migrants are not involved at often important policy and decision-making levels. In order to combat this, it's important that they're given the means, the time and the support to be engaged at policy level. Apart from that, it's important that they're respected and recognised. Often we see that their qualifications and experience is disregarded, and therefore they're not involved at the most crucial and important decision-making levels. There should also be a lot more collaboration in relation to NGOs and government. Again, we find that a lot of the NGOs are given funding, but because they're headed by people that don't have first-hand experience, there is a negative effect or little impact within migrant communities. We can see that from the referendum in the United Kingdom, the growth in disenfranchisement, the growth in segregation is simply there and being manifested even more. There's been a growth in hate crime as well. There's been a growth in attacks against Muslims and other ethnic minorities. What's even worse is there's been a growth in the levels of homelessness in the last few years, which have risen by 60%, and a large proportion of those who are experiencing these difficulties are from ethnic communities. Despite trying to have the legislation, the policies, because funding is being cut at local level, we find that a lot of the second-generation migrants are, again, disenfranchised and left open and vulnerable, therefore easy prey for people who want to introduce things like radicalization to them. And unfortunately, it seems that this is one of the factors that played in the most recent London bombings. The fact that there's also been increase in institutional racism is of concern. You find institutions outlining their nationalistic views. This has been exampled most recently by a young Rastafarian boy who was told to cut off his locks in order to comply with school uniform, which is absolutely ridiculous. Given the fact that we have modern trends of migration, which include African migrants who are dying by the minute on the Mediterranean, Rohingya Muslims who are also being ethnically cleansed, and also Syrian children who are staying in camps who are so traumatized that they're having to actually outline new areas of diagnosis to describe the level of trauma that these children are going through. The fact that we have international policies and treaties that are not ready to protect this modern form of migration exemplifies the fact that there needs to be a deep and most serious level of review and collaboration. At Affirm Human Rights, we hope to break down the barriers that migrants have in integrating with their local communities and being part of the most important decision-making process to ensure that the next generation of migrants do not have the same levels of discrimination that are being experienced today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list is the People's Assembly of Kyrgyzstan, followed by the European Center for Minority Issues, Caucasus. People's Assembly of Kyrgyzstan.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. On all the issues which have been addressed in the Kyrgyz Republic, including the question of the media, there have been reports submitted to the OSCE. In all of these issues, we follow these fundamental principles. Firstly, fairness. This is the fundamental right of each individual to live together in peace. Secondly, non-violence, a mutual understanding between people on the basis of non-violence. The third principle, equal rights of all ethnic groups, cultures, religions, and each individual, all of whom are a fundamental part in a harmonious and happy coexistence. Fourthly, freedom and responsibility. Freedom implies responsibility for its consequences. Fifthly, coexistence and the common good. This is living together in friendship which requires observance of universal ethnic principles. Sixthly, cultural diversity and ethnic unity. The respect for cultural diversity is an essential precondition for mutual respect between nations and ethnic groups. And finally, the use of rights implies a responsibility on action. And these fundamental principles are the duty of each conscious citizen of the Kyrgyz Republic. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is the European Centre for Minority Issues Caucasus, followed by Roma SOS. The European Centre for Minority Issues.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will speak on Russian.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Yelena Roshakan, and I represent the Roma community of Georgia, and I also represent the European Centre for Minority Issues Caucasus. Unfortunately, the situation of the Roma has not changed. It has not improved. According to the information collected by us, there are some 4,000 Roma in Georgia, but according to the official statistics, there's only 600 of us. Now, in my recommendations, I would like to turn to the Ministry for Equal Rights in Georgia. The strategy for the integration of minority groups is based on, or must be based on, giving equal opportunity to all Georgian citizens. But because there isn't full information about the Roma in Georgia, the strategy remains a dead letter and is not implemented. My concrete recommendations, therefore, would be the following. In a few points, it would be better to provide more opportunities for learning the Georgian language in places where there are many Roma, and also making sure that there be experts on Roma issues in different ministries and that there be close contact with them in order to know what their needs are. There should be information campaigns about public services that are available, provided in the Roma language. And there should be a raising of the awareness of the community about the history of the Roma, how many Roma there are, where they live, what their traditions are. That would also provide for limiting discrimination of the Roma by other members of the society. Thank you.
Next on the list is Roma SOS, followed by Open Dialogue Foundation. If I might also make a comment at this point, that we have 5 organizations on the reserve list. We will be able to accommodate them at 1 minute each. That will be followed by the right of reply. So still at this stage, if you know that you want to exercise your right of reply for the participating states, please, if you can indicate now, that would be helpful. Roma SOS.
Respected ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nesime Saliuska and I'm coming from Roma NGO from Macedonia. By following the implementation of the National Strategy for Roma in the past 2 years, since it has been revised within a time frame from 2016 to 2020, we have noticed 3 main issues which directly influence activity realization. First, lack of data. The strategy was revised and adopted without having set any indicators as a starting point, having no evaluation of the impact from the decade for Roma inclusion. This creates serious obstacles and inability for any effort for monitoring. Second, lack of state budget. By rewriting the same budget from year to year while not having used the low predicted fund for implementation of needed actions, there is no progress, rather regression. I would like to emphasize that allocated funds represent governmental will for integration of Roma. And thirdly, political participation within the ongoing political crisis. Roma political parties are excluded and ignored from public discussions as well from creation of state politics in Macedonia. Even though equality and non-discrimination is high on the agenda of the new Macedonian government, it is not reflected accordingly in state bodies and institutions. Just an example, I would like to mention that the only Roma MP from the ruling party in the parliament now is a candidate for municipality mayor. If he becomes elected on the upcoming local elections, the voice of the Roma community within legislative level will be missing. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is the Open Dialogue Foundation, followed by Protection. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a point of order.
Apologies, I didn't see you. Point of order accepted, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to wish to remind that according to the OSCE Permanent Council Decision number 81, the 12th October 1995, the state was admitted to the OSCE participating state under the provision in the national denomination, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The decision states that this state will be provisionally referred to all purposes within the OSCE as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, pending settlement of the difference which has arisen over the name of that state. Hence, please do ensure that the standard OSCE practice is duly applied and the provisional international denomination, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, is used in all material and all purposes in the context of that OSCE. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That point is noted. We'll move on. And next we have the Open Dialogue Foundation.
Dear Chair, I'm Dr. Urtok representing Open Dialogue Foundation today. I am drawing your attentions to rise of nationalism and human rights violations in Turkey against Gülen movement members and some Kurdish politicians within the past year. You should remember, we were all shocked with the tragic coup attempt in Turkey last year. Mr. President blamed members of Gülen movement very quickly within the first hours of the attempt for masterminding the coup. While the coup attempt was still in progress, the Gülen movement has firmly condemned this attempt to overthrow the country's democratically elected institutions and announced that the dreadful attempt should be fully investigated and whoever the perpetrators should face their legal consequences. However, the coup attempt was interpreted as a gift by God by the current president and then kicked off a huge purge in the country. It was declared that a state of emergency is necessary to spot Gülen movement supporters who suddenly became terrorists with a governmental decree, and Mr. Erdogan openly said, if you like, the practice could be called witch hunt. Government with the blame of being Gülenists so far fired from their works 146,000 civil servants, including thousands of primary school teachers, police officers, etc. Detained 126,000, jailed 60,000, shut down 2,000 schools and universities, sacked 8,700 academics, 4,400 judges and prosecutors dismissed, shut down 150 media outlets, and arrested 230 journalists, and confiscated billions of euro worth private assets. Reports by organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch showed that there is credible evidence that these people are being tortured in jails, as well as 75 of them allegedly died as a result of torture so far. Reports by the intelligence services in German BND and UK Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee showed that the coup was not masterminded by the Gülen movement. However, all the media in Turkey turned to be single channel because of the scaremonger in the country. Nobody heard of this. The oppression to Kurdish politicians, journalists, academics, and Kurdish activists and revealed that the witch hunt was not only to Gülenists but all oppression. Final words, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, specialist attention is required to prisoned babies in Turkey. Today, there are 668 babies younger than 6 months old in Turkey jails with their mothers waiting for international reaction. For further details, please check out the webpage turkeypurge.com, or I am more than happy to supply you with further details. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the list we have Protection, the Right of Ethnic Minority, followed by Koboleti, Roma Youth. Protection, the Right of Ethnic Minority, the floor is yours.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to be speaking in French. Nargijrat said, Georgie, I am the founder of an association to protect the rights of ethnic minorities. The Roma have many problems, but I'm going to talk to you today about two specific problems. The Roma are not allowed to speak their own language, which means that they cannot use it to pass on stories as heritage. In Romania, we want to allow Roma pupils and students to learn their mother tongue, which will in turn have a positive impact on building their communities. The Ministry of Education should look into this problem and provide the necessary resources, including human resources. Another problem is lack of Roma involvement in public affairs. They should be given the opportunity to participate in elections and allow them to vote. The first step in this process is a quota for the number of representatives. Now, hopefully, these steps that we're looking at are not utopian, and hopefully the state structure will recognize that this problem needs to be resolved. Otherwise, the Roma will be marginalized, and it's necessary to ensure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that perfectly timed intervention. And if I remind participants, since we have a very long list of both reserved speakers and right to reply, to stick exactly to the time if possible. Next we have Coboletti Roma Youth, followed by Political Movement Group 24. Coboletti Roma Youth.
Thank you. My name is Jumber. I'm from Georgia, and I represent an NGO of young Roma, the Roma Youth. We have many young people who have never gone to school, who don't know the official language of the state. Roma children from a very young age go to work. The girls take care of their younger siblings. The boys get involved in small businesses, and to have electronic registration in preschools and schools is all very well and good, but it doesn't help the Roma. And my recommendation would be to the Ministry of Education of Georgia that information campaigns be held in order to raise the awareness of Roma parents about the possibility of having their children educated, and social workers should pay attention to cases of discrimination against Roma who do not have access to education. Thank you.
Comments. Next on the list is the Political Movement Group 24, followed by Regional Cooperation Council. Political Movement Group 24. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Nuruddin Rizoi from Tajikistan, Head of Foreign Affairs of Political Movement Group 24. According to today's topic, I would like to focus on the rights of persons belonging to national minorities in the Republic of Tajikistan. Oppressions and injustice are happening over all societies in Tajikistan. But the national minority in the region of Badakhshan is in a very bad situation for a long time, and it's still going. Although Badakhshan is semi-independent, but unfortunately its people have no any contribution in their destiny. For example, First, head of province elected by the president, not by the people. Despite the existence of a local parliament, but without any authority. Third, it's one of the richest areas by its natural resources in the world. But unfortunately, the people of this region are deprived of all those resources. Number 4, the majority of the new generation of Badakhshan is among the rest of the Tajik youth in Russia working as a labor. 5, the central government does not give serious attention and don't care toward this region. The evidence of the mentioned is lack of factories and industries. Number 6, a part of their land was sold even the people was not asked. 7, all known and influential people from Badakhshan were killed or Number 8, and last, people of Badakhshan have suffered all sorts of pressures and threats, killing and torture. The worst happened in 24 July 2012 when the military attacked in the region and killed innocent people. The number of deaths is not determined yet because communication was blocked by the government. Many international organizations reported on this issue as Amnesty International, Freedom House, Human Rights Watch. Certainly, what happened in Khorugh can be called genocide. The most important personalities were killed in this campaign are Imam Nazarov, Sabzali, Muhammad Rizoyev. We have prepared a documentary film in this regard and have been handed an OSCE website. You can see it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next we have Regional Cooperation Council, followed by Roma Educational Association Harangos, Regional Cooperation Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Alexandra Bojogieva from the Regional Cooperation Council and work on the Roma Integration 2020 project that is funded by the European Union and the Open Society Foundations. The project works with the governments from the Western Balkans and Turkey to improve their performance regarding their Roma integration policies, their strategies and action plans on their path to EU integration. And we have been working for a year and a half, and I believe that I have some good news to bring to the table. The governments from the region adopted regional standards on monitoring and reporting, including impact assessments that has been recommended by the introductory speakers here in the session. And we are happy to say that most of the governments submitted their annual reports for 2016. We would further encourage the governments to make these standards parts of their official strategies and action plans, and we are also going to help them further improve these reporting and monitoring standards. Furthermore, we are helping the governments to properly budget their strategies and action plans, including public budgeting and donor funding. And in this sense, we are going to work with the governments, and we are encouraging the governments to develop and adopt regional standards for proper budgeting of the strategies and action plans for Roma integration, but also for general public budgeting responsible to Roma integration. And I would like to note that according to the monitoring reports from 2016, the weakest priority area is employment, and we would like to encourage governments to prioritize this particular priority area for the upcoming period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'd have the Roma Educational Association Harangos, followed by Estonian Institute of Human Rights. Roma Educational Association.
Good morning. My name is Anna Mirga. I'm here on behalf of the Roma Educational Association Harangos, but I would like to speak in my capacity as a scholar and policy analyst, having completed 2 researches, one for the Council of Europe regarding the impact of the Roma...
I'm sorry for the interruption, but participants must speak in accordance with the organization they've been registered.
Okay, that's fine. I think that both the comments and recommendations that I bring are actually in line with my organization as well. So I would like to simply state there is a growing consensus among different stakeholders, including Roma civil society, that anti-Gypsyism as a specific form of racism and hatred against the Roma and Sinti are the root cause of the Roma marginalization, exclusion, and their socioeconomic problems. And the current atmosphere results in intensification of of anti-Gypsyism all across Europe. It is also clear that existing anti-discrimination legislation proves insufficient to effectively counter anti-Gypsyism. So real socioeconomic inclusion and substantial progress will not crystallize unless anti-Gypsyism and the deeply rooted racism will be targeted specifically. The European Commission and the Council of Europe have been working already in recognition of the anti-Gypsyism. The OSCE Action Plan has also clearly a non-discrimination dimension and focus, although the term anti-Gypsyism is not referenced explicitly. I would like also to mention the valuable work of the contact point on Roma and Sinti issues in this regard. Having said this, I'd like to lay out a few recommendations. First of all, for the OSCE to continue its efforts in securing Roma rights and maintain the Roma issue on the top of the agenda. I'd like to also call on the participating states to include anti-Gypsyism at the core of their integration efforts to fight against anti-Gypsyism through horizontal and transversal measures. This should also include explicit reactive and preventive proactive measures, which include educating mainstream societies. Specific budget should be assigned to this end. I'd like to also conclude by saying that it's important to promote recognition, operationalization, and application of anti-Gypsyism in national legislation and courts, and call for greater coordination among all the stakeholders, including the EU, the Council of Europe, the OSCE, participating states, and the Roma civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Estonian Institute of Human Rights has withdrawn their request to speak. Therefore, the next on the list is the Humanitarian Legal Center. Following the next speaker, we would move to the reserve list, and they would have 1 minute each. The first of which would be the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. Humanitarian Legal Center. The floor is yours.
Спасибо, господин модератор.
Thank you very much, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Shutrak Ganiv, I'm from Uzbekistan Humanitarian Legal Center. We have a broad program of reforms underway with the arrival of the new leadership. That's something that we can clearly see, and it has an impact on all aspects of political life in the country, including the inclusion of ethnic groups and different nationalities living on the territory of our country. The monitoring is being carried out by our experts, and it shows that there is an absence of Mugat, Roma and Sinti represented in civil society. So underway in the country are making change that's giving rise to concern, and the absence of representatives requires some explanation. One problem is the lack of participation in education and civil life in these groups. The other problem is complicated electoral processes where it's very difficult for organizations to be registered. It's therefore necessary, we consider, to recommend a number of things. Firstly, to have an awareness-raising campaign about the Mugat people amongst the general population at large and the state structure. And we also need to promote young activists, helping them out with registration of organizations and support them also financially in light of their low income. Thank you.
The following reserve list order will be observed. First, the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. Second, Crimean SOS. Third, Institute of European Studies. Fourth, Center for Socio-Political Studies, Russian Baltica. And fifth, Russian School of Estonia. I'll have to be strict on 1 minute each. Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. The floor is yours. Do we have a representative of the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety? We'll move to the next participant, which would be Crime SOS. Do we have a representative of Crime SOS? We'll move to the next participant on the list, the Institute of European Studies.
Latvia is continuing to repress the Russian language minority. These people cannot use their own language. 40% of Russians in the country do not have citizenship, and they cannot be educated in their own language. And recently, new types of discrimination have come to the fore. It's a political discrimination carried out by the security service. A number of thousands of people, including myself, have been charged simply for speaking out in public to protect the Russian language. That has resulted in a criminal charge. I could go to prison for as much as 5 years. This is the official state policy. I have turned to the OSCE asking for protection, but have received no answer. Together with some colleagues, I have turned to the International Criminal Court with a charge against Latvia to the effect that it is conducting a policy of discrimination, which is an international crime. So in future meetings, I probably won't be present because I'll be in prison as a result of a political repression and persecution by my government.
Political Studies, Russian Baltica.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. In the OSCE and in other international organizations, the issue of minority rights, particularly those speaking Russian in Baltic states, has been raised. The heart of the problem is the issue of being educated in the mother tongue and civil society. In 2014, we saw the export of this policy to Ukraine, where these same language limiting policies are in place. As has been reported, the reform is being applied in Baltic countries and in Poland. We're seeing new trends developing as well, where Ukrainian policies are being exported to the Baltic countries. The visa-less regime, for example, the policies that are in practice which lead to the persecution of minorities is a problem. We're seeing the Ukrainianization of practices to the Baltic states. We have a document which bears this title, which we'll be presenting at 6 o'clock in a side event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last on the reserve list is the Russian School of Estonia, after which we will have the right to reply, the first of which will be Georgia. The Russian School of Estonia.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sergei Seredenko. I'm from the Russian School of Estonia. And within the context of today's statement, I'd like to say that the defense of national minorities in Estonia is complicated by the lack of a definition of national minorities, because the definition is set out in such a way that it only covers citizens. And it's taken from the Framework Convention on the Protection of Minorities, and it's ignored. What is ignored is that it's a question of human rights and not citizens' rights. And minorities are treated only as minorities if they include citizens. And These problems to this day have not been resolved over many decades. Thank you.
Right to reply. We have 15 participating states have registered their right to reply. The order will be as follows. 1, Georgia. 2, France. 3, Romania. 4, Greece. 5, Canada. 6, Albania. 7, Latvia. 8, Armenia. 9, Kyrgyzstan. 10, Bulgaria. 11, USA. 12, Russian Federation. 13, Croatia. 14, 15, Ukraine. We're running very close to the limit of time, so it will be strictly 1 minute for each intervention. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Combating violence against women and domestic violence, especially those who belong to the ethnic minorities and Roma population, remains top priorities for the government of Georgia. For the efficient fulfillment of this goal, in April 2017, Georgian government ratified Istanbul Convention. The full package of legal amendments were enacted, which strengthened legal safeguards to prevent violence against minority women and eradicate early marriage. Regarding the comments made by the NGO International Society for Meskheti and Turks, I would like to kindly remind them that Georgia has already accomplished all commitments undertaken upon its accession to the Council of Europe to facilitate the process of repatriation. The status of the repatriate is already granted to nearly 2,000 FDPs. The ordinance of the government of Georgia on a simplified procedure for acquisition of Georgian citizenship by individuals having returnee status has already been adopted in 2010. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor now goes to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. In response to Uni dans la diversité linguistique, I'd like to recall the following. We believe that languages such as Breton are part of France's heritage and linguistic diversity. France has not signed the framework for the Convention for the protection of minority languages because this runs against its constitution. The Council of State said that it was counter to Article 2 of the French Constitution, saying that France is an indivisible republic. Although it has not signed this convention, it has adopted measures which bring it into line with the provisions of the Framework Convention. And in response to Mr. Wati, I would like to reject the accusations that were made with regard to the treatment of the Roma or other minorities. I would like to reaffirm France's full commitment to the protection of the rights of the Roma people. I will be making a more comprehensive statement. Thank you.
Of Romania.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In relation with some concerns raised here today, Romania exercises its right of reply as follows. The Romanian government attaches great importance to the implementation of its strategy for Roma inclusion. Romania has a proper institutional framework and good results in fighting discrimination. We have a very active council for combating discrimination. Roma ethnics have been elected in the parliament and in local councils. According to the report on Roma carried out by European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights in 2016 and the UNDP, the Roma's level of self-perception on discrimination on ethical grounds in Romania is the lowest within the analyzed EU member states. The efforts are deployed in an integrated manner. An effective tool is the poverty map, drafted with World Bank support. It is intended to make maximum use of a chapter of EU operational program from human capital, targeting the diminishing of the number of poor and socially excluded citizens. The Romanian government strategy for Roma inclusion is accompanied by action plan focused on each major field of intervention as identified at EU level: education, employment, health and housing, complementing services, culture and combating discrimination. A full version of the reply will be distributed in writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It was a big surprise hearing the distinguished representative of the United States to mention my country. And for this reason, I would like to reassure my American colleagues that Greece is continuing and enhancing inclusive policies and positive measures in favor of Greek citizens that are members of the Muslim minority. These policies aim at furthering their integration in social, economic, political and other structures on both local and national level. Even in the current challenging economic situation, to seek further ways and means to meet the needs of the members of the Muslim minority and enhance their progress, prosperity and well-being. To conclude, I would like to repeat the words of the Greek Deputy Foreign Minister, Yannis Amanatidis, who said during the recent visit of the Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim in Western Thrace that the region of is an example of peaceful and harmonious coexistence of different religions, Muslims and Christians. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I pass the floor to the representative of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Regarding the points of order earlier in the session, Canada would simply like to express its concern about apparent attempts by some participants in the meeting to create confusion regarding the nature and name under which they take the floor, particularly when this seeks directly or indirectly to legitimize the illegal annexation of Crimea, a situation so clearly contradictory to the Helsinki principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The representative of Albania.
I would like to use the right of the reply on the so-called North Appears 1914 Association, because in their representation they have presented disinformation and deformation of the Greek minority reality in Albania simply because they do not operate in Albania and are not aware of the development in this reality of the Greek minority in Albania and other nationality minorities in my country is quite different. Himara citizens who claim irregulation in the process of approval of the project by the municipality council have not pretended that their property right will be infringed because they are minority. But they claim that as Albanian citizens, like all other citizens affected by the territorial and urban planning reform. As regard to minority right protection, the Albanian government is permanently, fully determined to guarantee and promote their constitutional right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The representative of Latvia.
Thank you. We disagree on the presented position regarding the national minority situation in Latvia and accusations of discrimination towards representatives of the Russian-speaking population. The mentioned allegations are unfounded. We are confident that the knowledge of state language cannot harm or distract from maintaining any other language spoken at home in families of persons belonging to national minorities. Opposite to what was said by the delegation, a process of mass naturalization has taken place in my country since 1995. The naturalization process began. Almost 500,000 persons have acquired Latvian citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good afternoon, colleagues. I see the empty chair of the Armenian delegation prompted the Azerbaijani Gongo to take the floor. I would like to stress that the issue of protection of civilians in zones of armed conflicts will be addressed by my delegation in due working. Meantime, I would like to mention that we usually politely disregard the statements of and accusations of Gongos, and we would like to encourage the delegation which has brought them here to not to hide behind them and to engage in genuine dialogue with my delegation. If you can try that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The representative of Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, moderator. In connection with the criticism of Kyrgyzstan by the delegation of the United States of America, I would like to note that in the Kyrgyz Republic, all citizens enjoy equal rights and opportunities. The rights of national minorities in Kyrgyzstan is guaranteed by the constitution and by the legislation of my country. Thank you for your attention.
The representative of Bulgaria.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I exercise my right of reply with respect to the statement by the U.S. delegation. Very briefly, the Council of Ministers in Bulgaria adopted a national Roma integration strategy until 2020. Roma NGOs and community leaders participated very closely in every step of the preparation of this strategy. Bulgaria developed a comprehensive monitoring system for its implementation carried out by the National Contact Point for Roma Issues. And last, European Commission in its most recent report specifically noted the made by my country on the issues of employment, health and education of Roma. Thanks.
Thank you. The representative of the United States of America.
Thank you. The United States takes seriously allegations of crimes targeting members of minority populations, and including the Muslim community. Our Attorney General made clear in his remarks at the 2017 Hate Crime Summit, quote, "We will not tolerate the targeting of any community in our country," close quote. Secretary Tillerson has stated, "Hate is not an American value. We honor, protect, and defend freedom of speech, but we do not, nor do we promote hate speech in any form." In regards to the point of order we made earlier, the United States continues to fully support Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
Thank you. The representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much indeed. The Russian delegation would like to use its right to reply, to respond to what has been said here by the delegation of the USA and Ukraine. We would express protest against the use of the word occupation. Our position hasn't changed. The accusations of mobilization of ethnic facts and artificial escalation of the conflict are also not justified wherever they apply to. We would also express our concerns to cast doubt upon the representation of the Bulgarian minority. The accusations made refer to acts that would undermine the principles of the OSCE. We support the decision that has been made to ensure free, non-discriminatory, free exercise of political rights and the right of organizations to participate in this meeting. Thank you.
Spasiba. The representative of Croatia.
Since Croatia was mentioned in the statement by the US representative and the representative of Roma Youth, I would like to reply and point out the Croatian position on the mentioned issues. Croatian government continues to emphasize the need to ensure highest level of protection of human rights, including protection of minorities. In its dialogue with the representatives of all minorities, Croatian government promotes mutual respect, cooperation and solidarity, as well as constructive dialogue and responsible facing of all societal challenges. Croatian government strongly condemns all forms of hate crime and glorification of any totalitarian system or regime, and each individual case is truly investigated and the perpetrators are brought to justice. Croatia gives the utmost importance to the prevention of any form of hate crime and of unacceptable historical regimes. Our government recently adopted Operational Plan for National Minorities 2017-2020 to further improve the position of national minorities in Croatia. For the most numerous national minority, the Serbian national minority, Operational Plan is the most extensive with many various activities. The legal base the rights and protection of national minorities in Croatia is enshrined in our constitutional and constitutional law and the rights of the national minorities, where 22 different national minorities are recognized. The Republic of Croatia guarantees parliamentary representation to national minorities and they elect 8 members to Croatian parliament, 3 of Serbian national minority and 1 of Roma. Thank you.
Thank you. The representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much. Ireland wishes to avail of its right of reply to the representative from Pave Point and make specific reference to the Irish government published National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy 2017 to 2021 published in June. It had this to say about the matter: travellers and Roma are among the most disadvantaged and marginalised people in Ireland, end quote. The representative from Pave Point specifically raised the matter of accommodation and really the very poor state or the non-existence of it. And we can mention that it is plans to revise the existing Traveller Housing Act 1998 as we consider it totally inadequate. And currently this act or piece of law which is considered inadequate to address the housing conditions of Roma is being looked at in consultation with representatives of their groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The final right of reply, Ukraine.
We condemn the provocative attempt of the Russian Federation to use the HDIM for legitimization legal occupation of the Ukraine's Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol by bringing here the representatives affiliated with the Russian occupying administration on the peninsula under cover of representatives of the civil society. It must be recalled that according to the international law and OSCE founding principles, there is no such regions in Russia, the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. Meanwhile, there are two Ukrainian regions which have been illegally occupied by Russia since 2014. Addressing the attempts of the Russian delegation and its NGOs from occupied Ukrainian territories, we would like to reiterate that violations of the rights of minorities in Crimea were documented by ODIHR, HCNM Human Rights Assessment Mission on Crimea and UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Moreover, in the proceedings of the concerning application of the International Convention on Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism and of the International Convention of the Elimination of all forms of Russian discrimination, the International Court of Justice, just 1 second, adopted the provisional measure instructing Russia to refrain from maintaining or opposing limitation of the ability of the Crimean Tatar community to convert the representative institution, including the Majlis, and to ensure the availability of education in the Ukrainian minority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to exercise my right as moderator to steal a couple of minutes, so that we can have a final closing remark for our expert introducers. Maybe I would start with Ilse.
Thank you very much. It's been a long and intense day of dialogue, so I really hope that we all join in welcoming what I think the focus particularly on rights of persons belonging to national minorities, rights of Roma and Sinti persons. And I think this is to really reconfirm that in the approach to integration that we adopt, how important it is to adopt a human rights-based inclusion as the perspective that we have. In particular, also those member states stressing the participation aspects and going beyond the formal proclamation of it to actual participation. The other hand, I think many reminders again of the implementation and where it's lacking. I think the dialogue to be continued on that. So my warning against complacency for all of us to take action against complacency in ensuring that we do have impact assessments and look how to adjust policies so that they do have impact. And finally, against the formal approaches, against adopting approaches that simply cite constitutional or declarative rights or formal approaches to participation, to actually focus on how we implement these rights in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very concise. Julius.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to invite participating states, those that did not do it yet, to recognize Roma and affiliated groups as a national minority. And of course to grant citizenship rights to the members of the Roma minority and affiliated groups. I think that's crucial for any discussion on minority rights. The second point I'd like to make is regarding participation in policy making. I think the participating states should go beyond the minority representation mechanism and the very limited and sporadic political representation of Roma. And one effective way to ensure meaningful participation of Roma is the use of deliberative methods, such as participatory budget planning. By doing so, will benefit all members of society, not only members of the Roma communities, and especially those members of societies whose voice is not heard in political processes, especially women, youth, persons with disabilities, and so on. So do consider the use of deliberative methods to ensure political participation of Roma in policy making. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and both Tanya and myself would like to thank the speakers and the audience, the note takers and the rapporteur, the interpreters for their indulgence of my excess, For the next sessions, I would remind you that the speakers list is open 1 hour beforehand, and based upon recent experience, you should sign up as quickly as you can. Please leave your headsets and receivers in the room, and I would remind you all that we have a good schedule of side events available over the lunch break, and I would invite you to the next session also on humanitarian issues and other commitments. Everybody have a nice lunch. Thank you.